Hi, I'm Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's RNK Software Club video of the week. And the topic for this week is a super cool tool that's called the Mesh Steil tool. It's found down here at the bottom of our workspace in one of our creation tools. And this is a design that I created. I guess it's kind of a bit of a doily, but it's the Mesh Steil tool that I use to do these cool kind of blue rings like that. And this is another design that's a really great example of the Mesh Steil tool. And so I thought we'd take a look at kind of how that all works. And so I'm going to click on a new empty workspace to get started. And I just want to explain something. You see, we have I'm going to maybe just draw a line here to kind of give us something to look at. And so I'll draw a little line and then select that artwork and convert it into a regular steel stitch. And notice that the regular steel stitch by default doesn't have any underlay whatsoever. And of course you can add underlay to that, and as you are, I'm sure, well aware, you can select a shape and come to the properties box and look on the tab for underlay, where you have the ability to choose what kind of underlay that this gets, right? And so, you know, there's many different choices of underlay that you could choose, and whichever one you do is the one that becomes kind of updated into the software. And so this is called a contour underlay, and it kind of walks around the outside of the shape. Well, underlay is very important. When you start doing freestanding embroidery, imagine sewing this column, especially before I added the contour underlay. Imagine sewing that steel stitch on wet and gone. What would happen when you got it wet? But it would basically just become a regular strand of thread again. And so we created a special tool, and it's over here. It's called the Mesh Steil. And essentially it's the same concept, that it's a steel column, but now it comes with extra special underlay, and those underlays will contour back and forth several times depending on how wide the column is. And then after it does those contours, it does these other ones that kind of step back and forth across the contours in kind of like railroad tracks. And so that is a mesh underlay is what we call it. And this is the tool is called the Mesh Steil. And so now when this sews, you'll see it goes back and forth and does that contouring, and then it does those sort of train track stitches, and then it comes along and finishes it off with a nice satin cover. And of course you can control all aspects of the parameters of that. So here's where you're going to control the sort of width of your steel, and this is where you're going to control all aspects of the underlay of that steel. And so you've got two little tabs that kind of come up for that. And if I make it fatter, you'll see lots more of the underlay. So I'll make it 5 millimeters instead of, I guess it was 3. And so see how it creates even more of that. And something that's kind of unique about this particular tool is sometimes we actually use it without the cover stitch. And in that case, you really just see the underlay stitches. And so when you look at that, the photographs of the doily, you remember the doilies that I was talking about? Well, I've got the photographs here from when I made those. And if you look closely, I have used no cover stitch on those steels. And so in other words, it's just the underlay and no cover whatsoever. And that's a feature I'll show you in the software. You can basically use a checkbox to turn that kind of steel cover off. And so this is what it looks like when you have just the underlay and you turn off the cover stitch. And so you can see, and if I get even closer to this, you can kind of get an idea of it's really a very open, kind of lightweight style of doing freestanding lace. And it's kind of a mock of what you might call a Battenberg lace effect. You know, obviously we don't create hand embroidery stitches with our embroidery machines, but we often try to create sort of things that emulate them. And so that's the concept here, that you could take that column and you could choose to omit the steel finish. And so once I chose omit steel finish, it really just creates that underlay. Now, obviously, the kind of fatter you make your column, the better, right? Or not the better, but the more of that area that you get. And so you can, now to really kind of make it successful in terms of being fully freestanding, if you can connect your lines, in other words, if you can draw something that has, like a loop like that, then those loops can actually connect to each other. And so if you make something like this and then you use your Mesh Steil tool, so that's over here, and whether you have a steel stitch or not, what you're trying to do is get it so that they're bigger and that they're touching each other. And so I didn't kind of quite get my points close enough to touch each other, but if I select those ones and kind of move them over a little bit, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is what I'm trying to say, is if you can create something that kind of has overlapping points like this, overlapping joins, then it not only gets your lace to kind of stay together along the column, but each column kind of connects to the next one and gives it a little bit extra strength so that it'll sort of hold up when you pick it up off the table and you're looking at it like this. And that's essentially what these are, because really if you look at this embroidery design, has, first of all, the applique, right? So the center of it is actually an applique. And notice this is something unique. I don't know how often you guys do this, but when I created the applique, I told it not to have a finish. So all it really did was the placement line and the tack down, and there was no kind of cover. And then for the tack down, I had it do a zigzag. So it's an applique that has a run stitch. So you place your fabric down, it does that first run stitch, and when it stops, you trim around it, and when it starts up again, it does a loose zigzag. And of course, I just do this all in the color white, because the next thing I did in the design was I created a Mesh Steil, and so the Mesh Steil became the cover of the applique. And so does that make sense? So, and that's why when I created the applique, I chose to not have a cover or a finishing stitch, because I then copied and pasted that same kind of circle that was the applique and turned it into a Mesh Steil. So now I have an applique that has a Mesh Steil outline, and then the border is simply a fancy column. If I take that border and like just convert it back to artwork, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just a single line that goes around and around like this. And so that is how you can create a Mesh Steil. You can use it with or without a cover stitch. But it's a very simple tool to use that's been designed to make creating freestanding embroidery kind of quick and easy. And I think that's really one of the things that Floriani's famous for, is taking things that maybe people have done for years and years, like creating freestanding embroidery, and making it so that, with not more than 1 or 2 clicks, you can create it yourself. Anyway, you guys, I hope you're enjoying your Floriani software, and I hope you enjoy our Floriani software club and our free monthly videos or free weekly videos. And so until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening, and bye-bye.